Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Digital governance is under the spotlight in the wake of the hype over artificial intelligence. The European Parliament this week passed measures for general-purpose AI and foundational models like GPT-4. Under the Parliament's plan, companies such as OpenAI Incorporated and Google would have to perform risk assessments and summarize the copyrighted material used to train their models, regardless of how they're used. Here's a quote from one of those particular individuals over in the EU, Thierry Breton, EU Internal Market Commissioner, saying that I expect clear and proportionate rules on generative AI to be among the key discussion points for the trilogues. Also saying that he expects, we need effective transparency requirements on AI-generated content and strict rules against deep fake. So we're going to be talking about governance in an AI world. Joining us from our Abuja studios to discuss further, Victor Famubode. He's a digital governance specialist. Victor, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Just for the sake of our viewers, let's start by defining digital governance, if you will, please.
All right, thank you, Rotus, for having me. I'll look at digital governance from two frames. So one is the macro side, and the other is the firm level. So from macro, it's just basically a set of rules, norms, institutions, standards that are created to help, govern digital technologies, and to also an extent to help govern in relations to the development and the regulation of these digital technologies. At firm level, it's just basically a set of processes, policies, internal controls, procedures, and even standards that are actually also created to govern, digital technologies. That's at company level. It's quite broader than that, but at the end of the day, the whole idea is to create a framework that can help with, managing some of the risks and, issues and threats that actually come, with the use of digital technologies.
Now, it's been said that regulation trails innovation, right? So with the rapid advancements in technology, are we seeing government's ability to keep up?
Oh, yes. A lot of times I'm always not in tune to the fact that policy or regulation tries to play catch up with innovation. I think far beyond that is the fact that we've gotten to an era where there's going to be a need to actually think proactively around how policies and regulation needs to be made to ensure that you can actually benefit from, innovation. And in that light, it will be advisable, for government to actually think around, policies and regulation when considering innovation from a perspective of things around taking an agile, governance approach. And this agile governance approach just basically helps them to, box the way in which they design policies from an experimental, view. And from there, you can actually now, create a room where governments can actually fail, right? But you don't fail and just stay back. You fail fast and you learn fast. So that's the kind of ideal environment in which you can actually start creating policies that rather than playing catch up, they can proactively help to manage the externalities that come with, some of these technologies or some of these innovations, in the broader future.
Okay, well, it looks like the future is here already. So in your view, how disruptive is artificial intelligence to the digital governance framework of, sovereign nations around the world?
Yeah, so artificial intelligence, which, a lot of times we refer to as AI, it's one that is highly disruptive in the sense that it is a dual-use technology, right? And because it is presumed to be a general-purpose technology, and what that means is the fact that it is highly pervasive. You can find it being deployed across different domains, And because it's been deployed across different domains, it means there's going to be a lot of thinking around what we need to do differently, with respect to ensuring that you can, at the same time, enjoy the opportunities that this technology provides, and also, manage the risks that also come with, the use of these technologies. And beyond that is the fact that we all know that there are some certain, indications that come to light with how this technology, can be used, especially when malicious actors get a hold of this technology. So in the light of this, there's also the control problem that countries would have to face. And this control problem come from either from the platforms that actually continuously produce this technology, and also the control problem from countries that are actually trying to race towards ensuring that they can harness the opportunities and potentials of this technology so that they can stay ahead and they can also offer competitive advantage.
Okay, great. Now, I want to pull up the quotes that I read right before I came to you, because I want to get your thoughts on what has been done over in the EU from the gentleman Thierry Breton, where he said that he's expecting items to be put in place, expecting clear and proportional rules on generative AI to be among the key discussion points for the trilogues, which is the talks that they're going to be having. And then also saying, I think that one of these worries is deepfakes, needing effective transparency requirements on AI generated content and strict rules against deepfakes. So what do you make of the European Parliament measures passed this week for the general purpose AI?
Okay, so firstly, it's actually a commendable, effort from the EU. And I remember back in 2021 when the whole EU AI Act actually started, they took actually a risk-based approach, which is a place where they actually classify the risk, according to the measure in which AI is being, proposed to be deployed, or the use cases that is actually proposed. However, over that period to now, what has happened is they've been able to find a way to adjust, based on new invention or new takes that come from the industry. And this new takes, like you mentioned, is generative AI, being considered largely to be regulated. And I would say that from this point of view, you would see that there's a lot of indications within the provisions where they are actually talking about the need to summarize copyrighted materials that is being used to generate, this content, especially generate things like deepfakes. You would see also that creatives have actually been concerned about how their works, like their images, their texts, videos, are actually used to, recreate or generate this kind of new videos that are developed from AI, AI tools. So I would say it's actually a thinking that is commendable. However, from our climb, what needs to be done is companies also need to start thinking proactively around how best they can, start creating a governance framework or a governance mechanism around how these technologies, that they offer either as products or services to the EU, how the implications will actually emerge. Because what is actually proposed is the fact that the impact of this act will start in, I think, 2026. So we look forward to things like the compliance and enforcement from EU. But again, every organizations that actually use this, and individuals need to actually take this into serious consideration when thinking about the problems that generative AI could actually pose.
All right, great stuff. Now, so that's one side of the coin. The other, that's the EU. They're being cautious and so on and so forth. We go to the UK and let's take a look at a feature article in The Economist on Rishi Sunak and his AI ambitions for the UK. So there he is, Brit GPT, and they're talking about how excited he is. So he's really excited about this. He wants the UK to be a leader here. Is digital governance in the era of artificial intelligence at the risk of being weak in Sunak's case when you have a leader like him who is really excited by the technology and wants the UK to get investment and so on and so forth in that realm?
Okay, so I think for me, it's going to be a wake-up call from various actors, especially from global policymakers. And like you mentioned, War Rishi, I think one of the things you also mentioned a few weeks back was the fact that they are proposing global summits on AI regulation in the UK later this year, and I think that's also something to actually look forward to, because the idea around that is saying digital governance needs to be at the heart of how you responsibly use this kind of technologies going forward, because we are clearly seeing some of the harms that come from the use of this technology, and for that, it means that we need to start thinking around what that would look like, especially from a global perspective. There has been, cases around the fact that there is a need to start thinking around a global oversight around, AI regulation. And this summit might actually tend to answer some of those questions. But from a Nigerian, perspective is we need to start keying into this conversation, especially from the global south. We need to have our voice heard in terms of ensuring that they also understand the contextual awareness that this kind of technologies, bring to our own kind of society. We need to participate in every form or in any way, in every way. And, we can actually now start looking at AI regulation from a place where it is equitable, right? And there are no countries that are really left behind per se. So I would say it's actually something that is commendable also from a UK perspective. However, even from the UK, you can also say that they are trying as much as possible to also, meet the gaps that are existing. So for instance, there's still the hardware gaps within the UK. And this hardware, because when you look at AI, there are different areas that actually make AI a successful, technology in terms of deployment and even implementation. And one part is compute. Compute is actually a big thing. And it's largely, dependent around hardware, which is mostly, facilitated by GPUs, that's graphics processing units. So those kind of areas that UK would also try to actually close the gaps, because those areas are things that right now the UK is still a bit far behind from, the likes of the US or even China. So there's a lot to unbox, to unpack here. But from a Nigerian, I always think about my country first. I would say that there's a need to start, progressively looking at these conversations and getting, to participate at the end of the day.
Okay, perfect. I'm glad you brought up Nigeria, because you're mentioning, the graphics processing units and the UK being far behind the Chinas and the US of the world. Okay, so what about, us here? Do we simply, as us in emerging markets like Nigeria, do we simply copy digital governance regulations from other nations, because we aren't as advanced in our use of AI, or should we even be having the conversation at all?
So I won't say we should copy. I'm always against copying. However, there are ways to actually think about this problem, right? And one way is to look at the perspective of what do we currently need as is right now. I won't even say that we should start looking at regulation, right? I would rather say there needs to be more awareness, right, across, the policy actors, the users, and even the producers of this technology. And this awareness can only, can be propagated by governments in power, right? And governments here, meaning that there needs to be like a release of, let's say, a policy primer that just clearly, determines that just clearly, creates awareness around the technology and the responsible nature in which this technology should be used across even different sectors and even domains. So those are the thinking that we should start looking at, firstly, before we start talking about regulation. By doing that, by taking that first step, what it does is it softens the ground to clearly understand, what are those harms or what are those risks from a local context, not just, pandering into the global conversation alone, but ensuring that you are able to deduce some real facts around what those key issues that are actually arising from the use of this technology. And also, you also want to ensure that you are democratizing the benefits of this technology and democratizing the access of this, the use of this technology and across the ecosystem. So those are things that we should put, on the front burner right now before we start looking at, full regulation of this technology.
All right, Victor, final question because we're out of time. I brought you on to talk about, digital governance. I want to take you into science fiction. I'll give us a quick outlook for artificial intelligence. Are the robots going to take over humanity and enslave us, or is that just movie stuff? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I do not agree. There's been a lot of around things like Extinction, and like you've mentioned, it comes from a place of science fiction. You can't totally ignore science fiction, because even the production of these AI systems also come from that place of science fiction, if you want to trace it back. However, we can't, a lot of these conversations, to me, they are speculative, right? Because what it does is it digresses from the conversation around some of the short to medium term risks that are actually occurring and harms. And this risk range from things like bias, privacy, disinformation, labor market distortion, and others. So those are the things that we need to clearly consider first before we're even talking about extinction. And kudos to those that have, AI researchers and engineers and experts that have continuously talked about things around extinction. However, because they are AI researchers, don't make them experts too on areas around forecasting. So we need to be able to demarcate, these specializations properly and leave it to experts that can actually determine issues, right, that concern areas around social impact. But nonetheless, it's still a conversation that is emerging. It's a conversation that is at the front burner of most of the things that we are looking at, especially knowing that AI has gotten to an explosive state. But notwithstanding, the robots are not taking over the world, and everyone can, be at peace with this particular information.
Okay, good. My job is safe. Arise News will not hire a robot to host the Global Business Report. Good to hear. Victor Famubode, Digital Governance Specialist, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.